Apollo 20. The mission. NASA says never happened. You think you know the story of the moon landings. Maybe you believe in the first landing. Maybe you don't. If you follow history, Apollo 11 made history. Apollo 17 closed the chapter. But what if that's not where it ended? What if NASA went further, much further, into the dark, beyond the headlines, and into missions so secret they were erased from existence? Missions like Apollo 20, buried beneath decades of silence. Not a conspiracy. A cover-up so complete, even the astronauts vanished from the record. Yeah, you heard that right. The very people who went on the missions, wiped from any government record. How? Why? In the coming sections, we will dive so deep into this cover-up, it will have you on the edge of your bed, or it will have you fast asleep. Either way, let the countdown begin. 3, 2. Section 1. The Vanishing Point. You wake up one morning in 1976 and discover that 2 years of your life never happened. Not metaphorically, literally. The official records show a gap where your memories insist there should be substance, a bureaucratic void where your lived experience demands recognition. This is precisely what happened to the Apollo program, except the amnesia wasn't personal. It was institutional, deliberate, and so thoroughly executed that even now, half a century later, the scar tissue of that erasure still throbs. NASA's official narrative terminates the Apollo program with Apollo 17's splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on December 19th, 1972. Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt became the last humans to walk on the lunar surface, their footprints fossilizing in the regolith as monuments to humanity's final reach toward the infinite. But financial documents, contractor records, and hardware inventories tell a different story. One where the program continued in shadows, where Apollo 18, 19, and 20 launched into a documentary void so complete that their very existence became a philosophical paradox. The psychology of institutional forgetting follows predictable patterns. When the CIA's MKUltra program was exposed in the 1970s, investigators discovered that the agency had systematically destroyed records, creating informational black holes that swallowed entire years of experimentation. The technique isn't deletion, it's replacement. You don't simply remove inconvenient truths. You overwrite them with more palatable narratives, repeating the new version until it becomes neurologically indistinguishable from memory itself. Consider the documentation that does exist. Saturn rocket manufacturing continued through 1975, with vehicles SA-516, SA-517, and SA-518 appearing in contractor invoices and quality control reports. These weren't display models or test articles. They were flight-ready vehicles that consumed millions of dollars in taxpayer funding. The rockets existed, the crews trained, the mission profiles were planned, down to the minute. Yet officially, they never flew. The philosophical implications spiral inward like a cognitive black hole. If a mission launches but leaves no official record, did it happen? This isn't merely an epistemic question, it's an ontological crisis. The Apollo 20 controversy forces you to confront the fundamental nature of historical truth. Is reality determined by what happened, or by what we collectively agree to remember? French filmmaker William Carroll explored this territory in his 2002 documentary, Dark Side of the Moon, which presented fabricated interviews with Stanley Kubrick and other figures suggesting the moon landings were staged. The film was deliberately constructed as a lie, but viewers who missed its satirical intent integrated Carroll's fiction into their understanding of historical reality. The Apollo 20 mystery operates in the same liminal space, half truth, half absence, wholly unsettling. The documented crew of Apollo 20 presents its own recursive puzzle. Commander William Rutledge, a figure who appears in training photographs and technical manuals, supposedly died in 1990. Except there's no death certificate, no obituary, no grave. His existence dissolves under scrutiny like sugar in rain, leaving only the faint outline of a man who may have flown further from Earth than any human being who officially lived. The mission's alleged purpose adds another layer of existential vertigo. According to fragmentary records, Apollo 20 was tasked with investigating anomalous structures on the lunar far side, objects that appeared artificial in orbital photographs, but defied conventional explanation. The crew was reportedly equipped with specialized excavation tools and extended life support systems, suggesting a mission profile that extended far beyond the typical 3-day lunar stay. But here's where the story consumes itself. The very evidence that suggests Apollo 20's existence also demonstrates the impossibility of maintaining such a secret. The Apollo program employed over 400,000 people across dozens of states. The idea that 2 additional missions could be launched, crewed, and completed without leaving documentary traces requires a conspiracy so vast and so perfectly coordinated that it approaches the supernatural. Yet the hardware existed. The rockets were built. The crews were trained. The mission plans were drafted and redrafted with the obsessive precision that characterized NASA's golden age. Something happened during those missing years. Something that required the kind of systematic forgetting that transforms history into mythology, while the participants are still alive to remember what never officially occurred. The recursion deepens when you realize that investigating Apollo 20 changes the nature of the investigation itself. Every document you examine, every photograph you study, every witness you interview becomes part of a larger pattern that seems to shift and reconfigure based on your level of scrutiny. The mission exists in a quantum state, simultaneously real and unreal, documented and erased, remembered and forgotten. What happens to truth when the institutions responsible for preserving it decide that some truths are too dangerous to survive? Section 2. The Disappeared Astronaut. The man who claims to have walked on the moon in 1976 doesn't exist, at least not according to any government database, military record, or public registry you can access. William Rutledge, the alleged commander of Apollo 20, has become a ghost haunting the digital age, a phantom whose internet presence grows more elaborate even as his official existence becomes increasingly impossible to verify. In 2007, a YouTube account under the name Retired AFB began posting grainy footage that purported to show classified Apollo mission material. The videos, narrated by an elderly man with a slight accent, claimed to document humanity's final lunar missions. The ones that never happened. The narrator identified himself as William Rutledge, former Air Force test pilot and NASA astronaut, speaking from his home in Rwanda where he had supposedly lived in exile for decades. But here's where your rational mind begins to fracture. The technical details in Rutledge's videos are extraordinarily accurate. He describes spacecraft modifications, mission protocols, and lunar surface procedures with the kind of granular precision that only comes from lived experience. His knowledge of 1970s NASA operations is encyclopedic, extending to obscure technical manuals and classified engineering modifications that weren't declassified until the 1990s. The psychological phenomenon at work here is called false memory syndrome, except it's operating in reverse. Instead of individuals developing false memories of events that never happened, we have an individual with apparently authentic memories of events that officially never occurred. Rutledge's recollections don't exhibit the typical markers of fabrication. They're emotionally consistent, technically coherent, and psychologically authentic in ways that conscious deception rarely achieves. The rabbit hole deepens when you examine Rutledge's claimed background. He allegedly trained as a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base in the 1960s, worked on classified aerospace projects, and was recruited into NASA's astronaut program through back channels that bypassed normal selection procedures. His military service record, if it exists, remains classified at levels that suggest either complete fabrication or security clearances so profound that they extend beyond death itself. What makes Rutledge's case particularly disturbing is the quality of the evidence he presents. The Apollo 20 footage he released shows what appears to be genuine 16mm film from the lunar surface, complete with the characteristic grain, color saturation, and camera movement patterns of 1970s space missions. The images depict structures on the moon that seem artificial, geometric shapes, metallic surfaces, and architectural features that don't match any known geological formations. The film's technical authenticity has been verified by multiple independent analysts. The lunar lighting is consistent with known solar angles for the mission's alleged time frame. The spacecraft interior matches documented Apollo Command Module configurations. The spacesuits exhibit wear patterns consistent with actual EVA operations. Either Rutledge had access to extraordinarily sophisticated film equipment and classified NASA technical specifications, or he's documenting events that actually occurred. But verification becomes its own kind of horror when you realize that authenticating Rutledge's evidence requires accepting that one of the most significant achievements in human history was systematically erased from official records. The Apollo program represented humanity's greatest technical accomplishment, witnessed by millions and documented with obsessive precision. The idea that 2 additional missions could be launched, completed, and forgotten challenges everything we understand about institutional memory and historical continuity. The psychological impact of this contradiction creates what researchers call cognitive dissonance cascade, a mental state where conflicting information becomes so overwhelming that rational analysis becomes impossible. You find yourself simultaneously convinced that Rutledge is telling the truth and certain that his story is impossible. The evidence supports both conclusions with equal validity, creating a paradox that consumes itself recursively. Consider the implications if Rutledge's account is accurate. NASA continued lunar operations for 4 years after the official program ended, conducting missions so classified that they required the systematic elimination of all participants from historical records. The astronauts who flew these missions became living ghosts, their achievements erased so thoroughly that they exist only in the liminal space between memory and documentation. The alternative explanation that Rutledge fabricated the entire Apollo 20 narrative presents its own disturbing possibilities. The level of technical knowledge, historical accuracy, and psychological authenticity required to construct such an elaborate deception suggests capabilities that extend far beyond individual hoaxing. Either Rutledge had access to classified information that should have been impossible to obtain, or he represents something more unsettling, a manufactured identity designed to spread disinformation so sophisticated that it becomes indistinguishable from truth. The recursion reaches its logical conclusion when you realize that investigating William Rutledge changes the nature of William Rutledge himself. Each query you make, each database you search, each document you examine becomes part of a larger pattern that seems to respond to your level of scrutiny. The man exists in direct proportion to your willingness to believe in his existence, creating a feedback loop where reality and investigation become indistinguishable. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect describes how the act of observation changes the behavior of particles being observed. William Rutledge represents the historical equivalent, a figure whose existence depends on the intensity of your investigation, whose reality fluctuates based on your willingness to accept impossible truths about forgotten missions to places that officially remain unexplored. What happens to your understanding of history when the witnesses to that history exist only in the spaces between official records and impossible memories? Section 3. The Phantom Hardware. 3 Saturn V rockets vanished from existence in 1975, their disappearance so complete that even the industrial infrastructure that built them begins to doubt its own memories. The rockets, designated SA-516, SA-517, and SA-518, appear in manufacturing records, quality control reports, and financial audits right up until the moment they cease to exist, leaving behind only the industrial equivalent of phantom limb syndrome. The Boeing plant in New Orleans produced Saturn V first stages with the methodical precision of a factory that had perfected the art of controlled explosions. Each rocket required 15,000 individual components, 5.6 million parts, and 3,000 tons of precisely machined metal. The manufacturing process consumed entire supply chains, employed thousands of workers, and generated documentation trails so extensive that they could reconstruct the industrial history of the entire American South. But something unprecedented happened to the final 3 rockets. They disappeared from the documentary record while simultaneously remaining visible in the physical world. Workers remember building them, engineers recall testing them, and technicians have vivid memories of preparing them for launch. Yet the official NASA inventory shows only 17 Saturn V rockets ever completed, with the final vehicle SA-515 used for the Apollo-Soyuz test project in July 1975. The psychological phenomenon at work here transcends simple institutional forgetting. When the Challenger disaster occurred in 1986, NASA's investigation generated over 6,000 pages of documentation, creating a permanent record of systemic failure that became part of the agency's institutional memory. The Apollo 20 hardware presents the inverse scenario, a systematic success that had to be surgically removed from existence, leaving behind only the scar tissue of absent documentation. The rocket engines tell their own disturbing story. The F-1 engines that powered the Saturn V first stage were manufactured by Rocketdyne in Canoga Park, California, using production techniques so complex that NASA lost the ability to reproduce them after the program ended. Each engine required hand-fitting of components, individual testing protocols, and quality control procedures that existed only in the minds of the engineers who designed them. The final 3 F-1 engine clusters, the power plants for SA-516, SA-517, and SA-518, appear in Rocketdyne's internal quality control database through 1975, complete with serial numbers, test firing data, and shipping manifests. The engines passed all acceptance tests, were certified for flight, and were delivered to Kennedy Space Center for integration. Then they vanished from the record, as if they had never existed, leaving behind only the industrial infrastructure that produced them and the workers who remember their creation. The manufacturing anomaly deepens when you examine the supply chain disruptions that should have occurred if the rockets had never been built. The Saturn V program consumed raw materials on a scale that affected entire industries. Aluminum production, steel manufacturing, and electronics fabrication all scaled their operations to meet NASA's demands. The sudden cancellation of 3 rockets should have created ripple effects throughout the American industrial base, leaving behind a documentary trail of canceled contracts and surplus materials. But no such trail exists. The aluminum suppliers show no record of canceled orders. The steel manufacturers report no surplus materials. The electronics contractors maintain no documentation of terminated contracts. The industrial ecosystem that supported the Saturn V program shows no evidence of the disruption that should have occurred if the final 3 rockets had been canceled rather than completed and launched. The engineering specifications present their own recursive puzzle. The Saturn V technical manuals, stored in NASA's archives, contain detailed modification schedules for rockets SA-516 through SA-518. These weren't preliminary designs or theoretical studies. They were finalized engineering drawings with specific part numbers, vendor specifications, and assembly instructions. The modifications included enhanced life support systems, additional scientific instruments, and structural reinforcements that suggested mission profiles extending far beyond the typical lunar landing scenario. The most disturbing aspect of the phantom hardware phenomenon is its psychological impact on the people who created it. Retired NASA engineers report persistent memories of working on the final 3 Saturn V rockets, memories that remain vivid and emotionally consistent despite the absence of supporting documentation. These aren't false memories in the clinical sense. They exhibit the temporal coherence, sensory detail, and emotional authenticity that characterize genuine recollections. The cognitive dissonance becomes overwhelming when you realize that the people who built humanity's most complex machines are experiencing systematic doubt about their own professional memories. The engineers who designed the Saturn V, the workers who assembled it, and the technicians who tested it are confronting the possibility that their most significant achievements exist only in the liminal space between memory and documentation. Consider the implications. If the Saturn V rockets SA-516, SA-517, and SA-518 were actually built and launched, then the industrial infrastructure of the American space program participated in a deception so comprehensive that it required the systematic alteration of corporate records, government databases, and individual memories. The alternative, that thousands of people are experiencing identical false memories about rockets that never existed, suggests a form of collective psychosis that challenges our understanding of industrial memory and institutional continuity. The recursion reaches its logical conclusion when you examine the current state of Saturn V manufacturing capability. NASA officially lost the ability to build Saturn V rockets when the production lines shut down in 1975, but the technical knowledge required to construct them should have remained intact in the minds of the engineers who designed them. Instead, the manufacturing process has become archaeological, requiring reverse engineering of existing hardware to understand how the rockets were originally built. The phantom hardware phenomenon suggests that the Saturn V program didn't simply end. It was systematically erased from existence, leaving behind only the physical artifacts and the traumatic memories of the people who created them. The rockets exist in a quantum state between reality and documentation, visible only to those who remember building them, and invisible to everyone else who consults the official record. What happens to technological achievement when the institutions responsible for preserving it decide that some achievements are too dangerous to remember? Section 4. The classified crew. The astronauts who supposedly flew Apollo 20 are simultaneously the most documented and most invisible figures in space exploration history. Their existence confirmed by training records, medical files, and technical manuals, while being systematically denied by every official source that should acknowledge their achievements. Commander William Rutledge's personnel file presents a masterpiece of documentary contradiction. NASA's internal astronaut database contains detailed records of his selection, training, and medical clearances through 1976. But these same records are immediately classified above your security clearance the moment you attempt to access them. The file exists in a state of perpetual visibility and invisibility, simultaneously present and absent from the official record. The psychological profile embedded in Rutledge's leaked training documents reveals a man psychologically prepared for missions that officially never occurred. His psychiatric evaluations, conducted by NASA's standard contractor physicians, document unusual stress responses and coping mechanisms that suggest preparation for extended isolation and encounters with unknown phenomena. The evaluations are clinically authentic, exhibiting the bureaucratic banality that characterizes genuine government psychological assessments. But here's where your rational mind begins to fracture. The psychological testing protocols described in Rutledge's file didn't exist in 1976. The evaluation methods, diagnostic criteria, and assessment techniques match psychological standards that weren't developed until the 1980s. Either Rutledge was subjected to experimental psychological testing that was decades ahead of its time, or his personnel file was created using anachronistic methods that betray its fabricated nature. The medical records deepen the paradox. Apollo 20's crew underwent extensive medical monitoring that included experimental procedures designed to assess the long-term effects of lunar exposure. The medical data suggests that NASA was investigating physiological changes that could only occur during extended lunar surface operations, missions lasting weeks rather than days. The medical monitoring protocols match classified research into the biological effects of prolonged space exposure, research that wasn't declassified until the 1990s. Command Module pilot Leona Snyder represents an even more disturbing documentary anomaly. Her presence on the Apollo 20 crew would have made her the first woman to fly a lunar mission, a historical milestone that NASA had officially rejected as technically impossible given the spacecraft's design limitations. Yet Snyder's training records show completion of every qualification required for lunar flight, including EVA procedures, geological sampling, and emergency abort protocols. The gender dynamics create their own recursive puzzle. NASA's official position in 1976 was that the Apollo command module lacked the privacy facilities required for mixed-gender crews, making female lunar missions technically impossible. But Snyder's training included detailed instruction on modified spacecraft configurations that address these limitations, modifications that appear in classified technical manuals, but were never implemented in any official mission. The crew's training regimen exceeded anything documented for previous Apollo missions. The astronauts underwent extended isolation training, survival exercises in extreme environments, and psychological preparation for encounters with unknown phenomena. The training protocols suggest mission profiles that extended far beyond the standard lunar landing scenario, involving extended surface operations and investigation of anomalous structures. Most disturbing is the crew's apparent preparation for contact with artificial structures on the lunar surface. The training documentation includes detailed procedures for archaeological excavation, artifact documentation, and contamination protocols that suggest NASA was preparing for discoveries that would fundamentally challenge our understanding of lunar history. The procedures match classified protocols for investigating potentially artificial phenomena, protocols that weren't developed until decades after the Apollo program officially ended. The crew's fate after the alleged mission presents its own existential horror. Official records show no trace of their continued existence after 1976, yet fragmentary evidence suggests they were relocated to classified facilities where they underwent extended debriefing and psychological monitoring. The debriefing protocols, leaked through unofficial channels, describe systematic efforts to alter the crew's memories of their lunar experiences. The memory modification procedures documented in the leaked files match experimental techniques that were being developed by military psychological operations in the 1970s. The procedures involved pharmaceutical intervention, sensory deprivation, and repeated exposure to alternative narratives designed to overwrite traumatic memories. The techniques were theoretically capable of creating false memories so convincing that the subjects would genuinely believe in experiences that never occurred. But the recursive horror deepens when you realize that the memory modification procedures could have been used in either direction. The techniques that could implant false memories of lunar missions could equally well remove authentic memories of actual experiences. The crew's apparent amnesia about their own achievements might represent the systematic erasure of memories too dangerous to preserve. The classification levels surrounding the crew's existence extend beyond standard national security protocols. The documents that mention their names are classified at levels that suggest information warfare capabilities, psychological operations, and technologies that remain classified decades after their alleged deployment. The classification itself becomes evidence of the mission's significance. Information this sensitive would only be protected if it revealed capabilities that could fundamentally alter global power dynamics. The crew's continuing existence in the documentary record creates a paradox that consumes itself recursively. They simultaneously exist and don't exist, their achievements simultaneously documented and denied, their memories simultaneously authentic and impossible. The astronauts who flew humanity's most significant space missions exist only in the liminal space between classification and disclosure, memory and documentation, truth and institutional necessity. What happens to human achievement when the individuals who accomplished it are systematically erased from the historical record while remaining psychologically haunted by memories of experiences that officially never occurred? Section 5. The Impossible Launch. February 1976. A Saturn V rocket launches from Kennedy Space Center in complete secrecy. Its 7.5 million pounds of thrust, generating seismic signatures that register on geological monitoring stations across Florida while producing no official documentation, no press coverage, and no acknowledgement from the space agency that built it. The launch of Apollo 20 represents the ultimate paradox of modern technological society, an event so massive and complex that it requires the coordination of thousands of people while remaining completely invisible to the public that funded it. The rocket launch generates physical evidence that extends far beyond NASA's control. Atmospheric disturbances, electromagnetic emissions, and seismic activity that should have been detected by monitoring stations across the southeastern United States. But the seismic data from February 1976 reveals something unprecedented in the history of space exploration. The U.S. Geological Survey's Earthquake Monitoring Network recorded unusual seismic activity originating from the Kennedy Space Center area, but the data was immediately classified and removed from public databases. The seismic signatures match exactly what would be expected from a Saturn V launch, yet no official launch occurred on that date. The atmospheric effects tell their own disturbing story. Weather stations across Florida recorded unusual atmospheric pressure waves and electromagnetic disturbances consistent with a major rocket launch. But these anomalies were attributed to classified military testing and excluded from standard meteorological records. The atmospheric data exists in a state of perpetual classification, visible only to investigators with security clearances that exceed those required for nuclear weapons research. The electromagnetic signatures present their own technical paradox. Radio telescopes and communications monitoring stations across North America detected the characteristic electromagnetic pulse generated by Saturn V engine ignition, but these readings were immediately classified under national security protocols. The electromagnetic data should have been impossible to classify. The signals were detected by civilian institutions using equipment that wasn't designed for military purposes. The most disturbing aspect of the impossible launch is the witness testimony from civilian observers. Residents of the communities surrounding Kennedy Space Center report vivid memories of watching a Saturn V rocket launch in early 1976, complete with the characteristic sound, light, and atmospheric effects that made the Apollo missions impossible to ignore. These witnesses described the launch with the same emotional intensity and sensory detail that characterize genuine memories, yet their observations contradict the official record. The psychological phenomenon at work here transcends simple false memory syndrome. The witnesses to the Apollo 20 launch exhibit the kind of detailed, consistent, and emotionally authentic recollections that only occur when people experience genuinely significant events. Their memories include sensory details that would be impossible to fabricate. The specific sound frequencies of F-1 engines, the unique light patterns of rocket exhaust, and the atmospheric pressure changes that occur during major launches. But the recursive horror deepens when you examine the industrial infrastructure required to support a Saturn V launch. The launch operation required the activation of entire support systems, fuel loading, communications networks, tracking stations, and recovery vessels. Each system generated its own documentary trail, work orders, personnel assignments, equipment logs, and operational reports. The absence of these records suggests either that the launch never occurred or that the documentation was systematically destroyed using techniques that exceeded standard classification protocols. The fuel consumption data reveals particularly disturbing anomalies. The Saturn V required 960,000 gallons of kerosene and liquid oxygen for a single launch, quantities that would have been impossible to obtain and store without generating extensive documentation. Yet the fuel consumption records from early 1976 show no evidence of the massive fuel purchases that would have been required for an Apollo 20 launch. The fuel either materialized from classified stockpiles or was obtained through supply chains that operated outside normal procurement channels. The launch complex itself presents its own technical impossibilities. The Saturn V launch required the use of Launch Complex 39, a facility so massive and complex that it couldn't be activated without the knowledge of hundreds of support personnel. The launch pad modifications, fuel systems, and communications equipment required for Apollo 20 should have generated extensive maintenance records, equipment modifications, and personnel assignments. The absence of these records suggests either that the launch never occurred or that the industrial infrastructure was operating under classification protocols that exceeded those used for nuclear weapons development. The global tracking network that monitored Apollo missions presents the most disturbing aspect of the impossible launch. The Deep Space Network, operated by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, was designed to track spacecraft throughout the solar system using radio telescopes in California, Australia, and Spain. The network's tracking data should have been impossible to classify. The radio signals were detected by civilian institutions using equipment that was designed for scientific research rather than military applications. Yet, the tracking data for Apollo 20 was immediately classified at levels that suggest information warfare capabilities. The classification protocols used for the tracking data exceeded those used for intercontinental ballistic missile telemetry, suggesting that the mission involved technologies or discoveries that were considered more sensitive than nuclear weapons. The tracking data exists in a state of perpetual classification, visible only to investigators with security clearances that may not actually exist. The launch represents the ultimate paradox of modern technological society, an achievement so significant that it required the mobilization of the entire American space program while remaining completely invisible to the public that funded it. The Saturn V launch generated physical evidence that should have been impossible to conceal. Yet the evidence exists only in classified databases and the traumatic memories of witnesses who are systematically denied official acknowledgement. The recursive conclusion becomes inescapable when you realize that investigating the Apollo 20 launch changes the nature of the launch itself. Each document you examine, each witness you interview, each piece of physical evidence you analyze becomes part of a larger pattern that seems to respond to your level of scrutiny. The launch exists in a quantum state between reality and documentation, visible only to those who remember witnessing it, and invisible to everyone else who consults the official record. What happens to technological achievement when the physical evidence of that achievement is systematically classified out of existence, leaving behind only the traumatic memories of witnesses who are denied official acknowledgement of their observations? Section 6. The Lunar Artifacts. The structures discovered on the lunar far side during Apollo 20's alleged mission challenge. Everything we understand about solar system archaeology, existing simultaneously in classified databases and impossible photographs, while remaining systematically absent from official scientific discourse. The lunar anomalies photographed during the Apollo 20 mission exhibit geometric properties that defy conventional geological explanation. The structures appear artificial, metallic surfaces reflecting sunlight, geometric shapes that suggest architectural design, and spatial arrangements that exhibit the kind of mathematical precision that characterizes intelligent construction. The photographs, if authentic, document discoveries that would fundamentally alter our understanding of lunar history and humanity's place in the universe. But the recursive horror begins when you examine the photographic evidence using forensic analysis techniques. The images exhibit all the technical characteristics of authentic lunar photography: correct lighting angles, appropriate shadows, accurate color saturation, and grain patterns consistent with 1970s film stock. The photographs are either genuine documentation of extraordinary lunar discoveries or forgeries created using techniques that exceed the technological capabilities of the era in which they were supposedly produced. The metallurgical analysis embedded in the classified reports reveals compositions that don't match any known lunar materials. The alleged artifacts contain metallic alloys that exhibit properties inconsistent with natural formation processes, suggesting either artificial origin or geological processes that challenge our understanding of planetary formation. The compositional data, if accurate, documents materials that shouldn't exist in the solar system's current configuration. The geometric analysis presents its own existential crisis. The structures photographed during Apollo 20 exhibit mathematical relationships that suggest intelligent design, precise angles, symmetrical arrangements, and spatial proportions that match architectural principles used in human construction. The geometric properties are so consistent with artificial origin that they would be impossible to explain through natural geological processes. Yet their existence on the lunar surface challenges everything we understand about the history of intelligence in the solar system. The archaeological protocols documented in the classified mission reports reveal preparation for discoveries that NASA officially considered impossible. The crew was equipped with specialized excavation tools, sample containers designed for artifact preservation, and documentation procedures that match archaeological standards rather than geological sampling protocols. The mission profile suggests that NASA was preparing for discoveries that would require archaeological rather than scientific investigation. The contamination protocols present their own technical paradox. The Apollo 20 crew underwent decontamination procedures that exceeded those used for previous lunar missions, suggesting exposure to materials that posed unknown biological risks. The decontamination protocols match those used for investigating potentially hazardous biological materials, protocols that shouldn't have been necessary for investigating geological samples from the moon's sterile environment. The sample return manifest, leaked through unofficial channels, documents the recovery of materials that exhibit properties inconsistent with natural formation. The samples allegedly returned by Apollo 20 included metallic fragments, crystalline structures, and organic compounds that challenge our understanding of lunar chemistry. The sample analysis, if accurate, documents discoveries that would revolutionize our understanding of the solar system's history and the origins of intelligent life. But the most disturbing aspect of the lunar artifacts is their continuing existence in classified research facilities. The materials allegedly returned by Apollo 20 continue to be studied by government researchers using techniques that remain classified decades after the mission's completion. The ongoing research suggests that the artifacts exhibit properties that pose either extraordinary opportunities or existential threats to human civilization. The research protocols documented in leaked reports reveal investigation techniques that exceed those used for studying terrestrial materials. The artifacts are subjected to analysis using experimental techniques that suggest properties beyond current scientific understanding, materials that exhibit electromagnetic anomalies, structural properties that challenge known physics, and compositional characteristics that shouldn't exist in the solar system's current configuration. The classification levels surrounding the lunar artifacts extend beyond standard national security protocols. The documents that describe their properties are classified at levels that suggest information, warfare capabilities, technological advantages, and discoveries that could fundamentally alter global power dynamics. The classification itself becomes evidence of the artifact's significance. Information this sensitive would only be protected if it revealed capabilities that could reshape human civilization. The psychological impact on the researchers who study the artifacts presents its own recursive horror. The scientists who analyze the lunar materials report persistent dreams, altered perception, and psychological changes that suggest exposure to phenomena that challenge human cognition. The psychological effects match those documented in classified studies of encounters with anomalous materials, studies that remain classified decades after their completion. The artifacts exist in a state of perpetual classification, simultaneously documented and denied, studied and ignored, revolutionary and impossible. The materials that could prove humanity's greatest discovery remain locked in classified facilities where they are subjected to analysis using techniques that exceed public scientific understanding. The lunar artifacts represent the ultimate paradox of modern scientific discovery, evidence so significant that it must be systematically hidden from the civilization that discovered it. The recursive conclusion becomes inescapable when you realize that the lunar artifacts exist in a quantum state between discovery and classification. They simultaneously represent humanity's greatest achievement and its most dangerous secret, documented in classified databases, while remaining systematically absent from public scientific discourse. The artifacts exist only in the liminal space between discovery and acknowledgement, revolution and secrecy, truth and institutional necessity. What happens to scientific discovery when the evidence of that discovery is classified at levels that exceed those used for nuclear weapons, leaving behind only the traumatic memories of researchers who are systematically denied acknowledgement of their work? Section 7. The cover-up architecture. The systematic erasure of Apollo 20 from official records required the construction of a cover-up so architecturally complex that it became a technological achievement rivaling the space program itself, a conspiracy that consumed more resources than the mission it was designed to conceal. The information warfare campaign that erased Apollo 20 from public consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously, creating redundant systems of denial that reinforce each other recursively. The cover-up doesn't simply hide information. It actively manufactures alternative narratives that replace the original events in both official records and public memory. The campaign represents the ultimate evolution of institutional lying, not just the concealment of truth, but its systematic replacement with more convenient fictions. The documentary destruction protocols documented in leaked intelligence files reveal techniques that exceed those used for protecting nuclear weapons information. The Apollo 20 records weren't simply classified. They were subjected to systematic alteration using techniques that created false documentary trails, leading to manufactured conclusions. The alteration process required the coordination of multiple intelligence agencies, each responsible for different aspects of the information warfare campaign. The personnel management aspect of the cover-up presents its own logistical nightmare. The Apollo 20 mission required the knowledge and cooperation of thousands of people: engineers, technicians, contractors, and support personnel. The cover-up required either the systematic elimination of these people or their conversion into unknowing participants in the deception. The personnel management protocols suggest techniques that exceed those used for conventional intelligence operations. The most disturbing aspect of the cover-up architecture is its self-reinforcing nature. The system designed to conceal Apollo 20 generates its own evidence of the mission's non-existence, creating a feedback loop where the cover-up becomes more convincing over time. The denial system doesn't just hide the truth. It actively generates false evidence that supports the official narrative, creating an alternate reality that becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish from actual events. The media management campaign reveals the industrial scale of the deception. The cover-up required the systematic exclusion of Apollo 20 from press coverage, historical accounts, and public discourse. The media management protocols suggest coordination with news organizations, publishers, and educational institutions that exceeded the scope of conventional government information campaigns. The media campaign didn't just suppress information, it actively promoted alternative narratives that replaced the original events in public consciousness. The technological requirements for the cover-up exceed those of the mission itself. The systematic alteration of records, the coordination of multiple agencies, and the management of thousands of personnel required information processing capabilities that push the boundaries of 1970s technology. The cover-up represents a technological achievement that rivaled the space program in complexity and exceeded it in scope. The psychological warfare component of the cover-up reveals techniques that match those used in the most sophisticated intelligence operations. The campaign included systematic disinformation, manufactured evidence, and psychological manipulation designed to create false memories in both participants and observers. The psychological techniques suggest capabilities that exceeded those used for conventional intelligence operations, approaching the level of systematic mind control. The international coordination required for the cover-up presents its own impossibility. The Apollo 20 mission generated evidence that would have been detected by multiple foreign intelligence services, yet no foreign government has ever acknowledged the mission's existence. The international silence suggests either a cover-up that exceeded the scope of the Cold War, or coordination between adversarial intelligence services that would have been impossible given the geopolitical tensions of the era. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the economic cost of the cover-up. The resources required to systematically erase Apollo 20 from official records exceeded the cost of the original mission, creating a situation where the lie became more expensive than the truth. The economic analysis suggests that the cover-up consumed resources that could have funded multiple additional space missions, creating a paradox where the attempt to hide space exploration became more costly than actual space exploration. The cover-up's failure modes reveal its true sophistication. The system designed to conceal Apollo 20 includes built-in mechanisms for detecting and countering investigation attempts, creating a feedback loop where the cover-up becomes more elaborate in response to scrutiny. The system doesn't just hide information. It actively responds to investigation attempts by generating new layers of deception that are specifically designed to counter the investigative techniques being used. The legal framework supporting the cover-up exceeds standard national security protocols. The legal authorities invoked to justify the Apollo 20 cover-up include emergency powers that were never publicly acknowledged, legal precedents that were never established, and executive authorities that may not have existed within the constitutional framework. The legal analysis suggests that the cover-up required the creation of a parallel legal system that operated outside normal constitutional constraints. The most disturbing aspect of the cover-up architecture is its continuing evolution. The system designed to conceal Apollo 20 continues to generate new layers of deception decades after the original mission, creating a feedback loop where the cover-up becomes increasingly elaborate over time. The system has achieved a kind of technological immortality, continuing to function and evolve even as the original participants die and the original rationale becomes obsolete. The cover-up represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare, a system so sophisticated that it creates its own reality, so comprehensive that it becomes indistinguishable from truth and so persistent that it continues to function decades after its creation. The system designed to conceal Apollo 20 has become a technological organism that feeds on investigation attempts and grows stronger through scrutiny. What happens to truth when the systems designed to conceal it become more sophisticated than the systems designed to preserve it, creating a feedback loop where lies become more convincing than reality? Section 8. The Witness Elimination. The systematic silencing of Apollo 20 witnesses reveals a pattern of disappearances, deaths, and psychological breakdowns that suggests a cover-up willing to sacrifice human lives to protect secrets that may not have justified the cost of their concealment. The mortality statistics for Apollo 20 personnel exhibit patterns that defy statistical probability. The engineers, technicians, and support staff who worked on the mission experienced death rates that exceeded normal actuarial expectations by margins that suggest systematic intervention. The deaths weren't dramatic. Heart attacks, car accidents, suicides, and medical complications that individually appear unremarkable, but collectively represent a statistical impossibility. Dr. Sarah Chen, a systems engineer who allegedly worked on Apollo 20's life support modifications, died in a car accident in 1978. The accident report describes a single vehicle collision that occurred on a straight road in clear weather conditions, involving a car that had passed safety inspection 3 days earlier. The investigation concluded that Chen fell asleep at the wheel, despite testimony from colleagues that she was well rested and had consumed caffeine less than an hour before the accident. The psychological warfare campaign targeting Apollo 20 witnesses reveals techniques that exceed those used for conventional intelligence operations. The witnesses who survived the initial wave of eliminations were subjected to systematic psychological harassment designed to discredit their memories and destroy their credibility. The harassment included surveillance, intimidation, and psychological manipulation that matched techniques used in the most sophisticated intelligence operations. The medical intervention protocols documented in leaked files reveal systematic attempts to alter witnesses' memories using pharmaceutical and psychological techniques. The witnesses were subjected to medical treatment that included experimental drugs, sensory deprivation, and repeated exposure to alternative narratives designed to overwrite their memories of Apollo 20. The medical protocols match those used in classified mind control experiments, suggesting that the witness elimination program included systematic attempts to alter human memory and perception. The suicide epidemic among Apollo 20 personnel presents its own statistical impossibility. The suicide rate among mission personnel exceeded normal rates by margins that suggest systematic intervention. The suicides weren't dramatic, pills, hanging, and carbon monoxide poisoning that individually appear unremarkable, but collectively represent a psychological warfare campaign designed to eliminate witnesses while maintaining plausible deniability. James Morrison, a communications technician who allegedly monitored Apollo 20's transmissions, committed suicide in 1979 using a method that matched classified psychological warfare techniques. Morrison's suicide note described feelings of guilt and depression related to classified work that should never have been undertaken, but the note's language and psychological content match templates used in psychological operations designed to create false confessions and manufactured guilt. The witness protection failures reveal the scope of the elimination program. The few Apollo 20 personnel who attempted to seek protection from law enforcement agencies were systematically denied assistance, suggesting coordination between the elimination program and civilian law enforcement that exceeded normal intelligence cooperation protocols. The witnesses who attempted to go public were subjected to systematic character assassination that destroyed their credibility before they could present their evidence. The family elimination protocols represent the most disturbing aspect of the witness elimination program. The family members of Apollo 20 personnel were subjected to systematic harassment, intimidation, and elimination that extended the program beyond the original participants. The family elimination protocols suggest a program willing to sacrifice entire family lines to protect secrets that may not have justified the cost of their concealment. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the psychological impact on the elimination program's participants. The intelligence operatives who implemented the witness elimination program were themselves subjected to systematic psychological monitoring and eventual elimination, creating a feedback loop where the cover-up consumed its own participants. The program achieved a kind of technological immortality by systematically eliminating everyone who understood its operation. The elimination techniques evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated as the program encountered resistance. The early eliminations were crude, obvious murders disguised as accidents or suicides. The later eliminations exhibited technological sophistication that suggested access to experimental weapons and psychological manipulation, techniques that exceeded those used for conventional intelligence operations. The surveillance protocols implemented against Apollo 20 witnesses revealed capabilities that exceeded those used for monitoring foreign intelligence operatives. The witnesses were subjected to total surveillance that included monitoring of their communications, movements, and psychological state, using techniques that pushed the boundaries of 1970s technology. The surveillance data was used to predict and prevent disclosure attempts before they could be implemented. The most disturbing aspect of the witness elimination program is its continuing operation decades after the original mission. The program has achieved a kind of technological immortality, continuing to monitor and eliminate witnesses, even as the original participants die and the original rationale becomes obsolete. The program represents the ultimate achievement of systematic secrecy, a system so sophisticated that it becomes more important than the secrets it was designed to protect. The elimination program's failure modes reveal its true sophistication. The system includes built-in mechanisms for detecting and countering investigation attempts, creating a feedback loop where the elimination program becomes more elaborate in response to scrutiny. The system doesn't just eliminate witnesses. It actively responds to investigation attempts by generating new layers of deception and elimination that are specifically designed to counter the investigative techniques being used. The legal framework supporting the witness elimination program exceeds standard national security protocols. The legal authorities invoked to justify the elimination of American citizens include emergency powers that were never publicly acknowledged, legal precedents that were never established, and executive authorities that may not have existed within the constitutional framework. The legal analysis suggests that the elimination program required the creation of a parallel legal system that operated outside normal constitutional constraints. What happens to democratic society when the systems designed to protect national security become willing to systematically eliminate citizens whose only crime was witnessing events that officially never occurred? Section 9. The International Conspiracy. The global silence surrounding Apollo 20 reveals a conspiracy that transcends national boundaries, suggesting either unprecedented international cooperation or the existence of power structures that operate beyond the control of individual governments. The Soviet Union's failure to acknowledge Apollo 20 presents the most significant anomaly in the international conspiracy. Soviet space tracking capabilities in 1976 were sophisticated enough to detect and analyze any American space mission, yet no Soviet intelligence service, space agency, or government official ever acknowledged the existence of Apollo 20. The Soviet silence suggests either systematic failure of their intelligence capabilities or participation in a conspiracy that exceeded the scope of Cold War competition. The tracking data from Soviet space monitoring stations should have made concealing Apollo 20 impossible. The Deep Space Communication Complex at Baikonur, the radar installations in Kamchatka, and the signals intelligence stations across the Soviet Union were specifically designed to monitor American space activities. The facilities possessed the technical capability to detect, track, and analyze any Saturn V launch. Yet no Soviet source has ever acknowledged detecting Apollo 20. The Chinese space program presents its own disturbing silence. The People's Republic of China had developed sophisticated space tracking capabilities by 1976, including radar installations that could monitor launches from Kennedy Space Center. The Chinese silence regarding Apollo 20 suggests either systematic failure of their intelligence capabilities or participation in an international conspiracy that exceeded the scope of Sino-American relations during the era. The European Space Agency's predecessor organizations possessed tracking capabilities that should have detected Apollo 20, yet no European government or space agency has ever acknowledged the mission's existence. The European silence suggests either systematic failure of their technical capabilities or participation in a conspiracy that included nations with no direct interest in American space activities. The international amateur radio community presents the most disturbing aspect of the global conspiracy. Amateur radio operators around the world routinely monitored Apollo mission communications, providing independent verification of NASA's activities. The amateur radio community's silence regarding Apollo 20 suggests either systematic failure of their monitoring capabilities or participation in a conspiracy that included civilian populations with no connection to government intelligence services. The United Nations' failure to acknowledge Apollo 20 reveals the conspiracy's institutional depth. The United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space was specifically designed to monitor and regulate space activities, yet the committee has never acknowledged Apollo 20's existence. The UN's silence suggests either systematic failure of their monitoring capabilities or the existence of power structures that operate beyond the control of international institutions. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the economic implications of the international conspiracy. The resources required to coordinate global silence regarding Apollo 20 would have exceeded the cost of the original mission, creating a situation where the cover-up became more expensive than the truth. The economic analysis suggests that the conspiracy consumed resources that could have funded multiple international space programs, creating a paradox where the attempt to hide space exploration became more costly than actual space exploration. The technological requirements for coordinating global silence exceed those of the mission itself. The systematic coordination of intelligence agencies, space organizations, and government institutions across multiple continents required information processing capabilities that pushed the boundaries of 1970s technology. The conspiracy represents a technological achievement that rivaled the space program in complexity and exceeded it in scope. The psychological warfare component of the international conspiracy reveals techniques that match those used in the most sophisticated intelligence operations. The campaign included systematic disinformation, manufactured evidence, and psychological manipulation designed to create false memories in both participants and observers across multiple nations. The psychological techniques suggest capabilities that exceeded those used for conventional intelligence operations, approaching the level of systematic mind control on a global scale. The most disturbing aspect of the international conspiracy is its self-reinforcing nature. The system designed to conceal Apollo 20 generates its own evidence of the mission's non-existence across multiple nations, creating a feedback loop where the cover-up becomes more convincing over time. The denial system doesn't just hide the truth, it actively generates false evidence that supports the official narrative across multiple cultures and languages. The conspiracy's failure modes reveal its true sophistication. The system includes built-in mechanisms for detecting and countering investigation attempts across multiple nations, creating a feedback loop where the conspiracy becomes more elaborate in response to scrutiny. The system doesn't just hide information, it actively responds to investigation attempts by generating new layers of deception that are specifically designed to counter the investigative techniques being used. The legal framework supporting the international conspiracy exceeds standard diplomatic protocols. The legal authorities invoked to justify the global silence include emergency powers that were never publicly acknowledged, legal precedents that were never established, and executive authorities that may not have existed within the constitutional frameworks of multiple nations. The legal analysis suggests that the conspiracy required the creation of a parallel legal system that operated outside normal constitutional constraints across multiple continents. The conspiracy represents the ultimate achievement of international cooperation, a system so sophisticated that it creates its own reality across multiple nations, so comprehensive that it becomes indistinguishable from truth across multiple cultures, and so persistent that it continues to function decades after its creation. The system designed to conceal Apollo 20 has become a technological organism that feeds on investigation attempts across multiple continents and grows stronger through scrutiny. What happens to international law when the systems designed to conceal military secrets become more sophisticated than the systems designed to preserve diplomatic transparency, creating a feedback loop where lies become more convincing than reality across multiple nations? Section 10. The Psychological Experiments. The classified psychological research conducted on Apollo 20 participants reveals experiments that exceeded the scope of conventional space medicine, suggesting systematic attempts to alter human consciousness and memory that push the boundaries of ethical research. The psychological preparation protocols for Apollo 20 included experimental techniques that weren't documented in any previous NASA mission. The crew underwent systematic psychological conditioning designed to prepare them for encounters with phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of reality. The conditioning protocols match those used in classified mind control experiments, suggesting that the mission involved psychological challenges that exceeded those of normal space exploration. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a psychiatrist who allegedly worked on the Apollo 20 psychological preparation program, developed techniques for managing what she termed ontological shock, the psychological trauma that occurs when individuals encounter evidence that fundamentally challenges their understanding of reality. Her research, documented in classified reports, describes psychological conditioning techniques designed to prevent mental breakdown when confronted with impossible phenomena. The memory management protocols documented in leaked files reveal systematic attempts to control the crew's recollection of their experiences. The protocols included pharmaceutical intervention, sensory deprivation, and repeated exposure to alternative narratives designed to overwrite traumatic memories. The memory management techniques match those used in classified psychological warfare experiments, suggesting that the mission involved experiences that were considered too dangerous to remember. The isolation experiments conducted on Apollo 20 participants exceeded those used for previous space missions. The crew was subjected to extended isolation in environments designed to simulate the psychological effects of encountering artificial structures on the lunar surface. The isolation protocols included sensory deprivation, psychological manipulation, and experimental drugs that were designed to test the crew's ability to maintain sanity when confronted with phenomena that challenged their understanding of reality. The most disturbing aspect of the psychological experiments is their focus on managing contact with artificial intelligence. The crew underwent systematic preparation for encounters with technological artifacts that exhibited signs of intelligent design. The preparation protocols included psychological conditioning designed to prevent mental breakdown when confronted with evidence of non-human intelligence, suggesting that the mission involved discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe. The debriefing protocols documented in classified reports reveal systematic attempts to alter the crew's memories after their return from the lunar surface. The debriefing included pharmaceutical intervention, psychological manipulation, and memory modification techniques that were designed to prevent the crew from remembering their experiences. The debriefing protocols match those used in classified mind control experiments, suggesting that the mission involved discoveries that were considered too dangerous to remember. The psychological monitoring of Apollo 20 participants continued for decades after the mission's completion. The crew was subjected to systematic psychological surveillance designed to detect and prevent disclosure attempts. The monitoring protocols included regular psychological evaluation, pharmaceutical intervention, and systematic isolation from civilian populations. The monitoring represents the ultimate achievement of systematic secrecy, a system so sophisticated that it continues to function decades after its creation. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the psychological impact on the researchers who conducted the experiments. The psychiatrists and psychologists who worked on the Apollo 20 program were themselves subjected to systematic psychological monitoring and eventual elimination, creating a feedback loop where the psychological experiments consumed their own participants. The program achieved a kind of technological immortality by systematically eliminating everyone who understood its operation. The experimental techniques used on Apollo 20 participants exceeded those used for conventional psychological research. The crew was subjected to experimental drugs, sensory manipulation, and psychological conditioning that pushed the boundaries of ethical research. The experimental protocols match those used in classified mind control experiments, suggesting that the mission involved psychological challenges that exceeded those of normal space exploration. The most disturbing aspect of the psychological experiments is their continuing evolution. The techniques developed for Apollo 20 continue to be refined and applied to new participants decades after the original mission. The psychological experiments have achieved a kind of technological immortality, continuing to evolve and adapt, even as the original participants die and the original rationale becomes obsolete. The psychological experiments represent the ultimate achievement of systematic mind control, a system so sophisticated that it creates its own reality in the minds of its participants, so comprehensive that it becomes indistinguishable from genuine memory, and so persistent that it continues to function decades after its creation. The system designed to manage the psychological impact of Apollo 20 has become a technological organism that feeds on human consciousness and grows stronger through psychological manipulation. What happens to human consciousness when the systems designed to manage psychological trauma become more sophisticated than the systems designed to preserve authentic memory, creating a feedback loop where artificial memories become more convincing than genuine experience? Section 11. The technological anomalies. The technology allegedly discovered during Apollo 20's lunar mission exhibits properties that challenge fundamental assumptions about material science, suggesting either extraordinary advances in human engineering or encounters with artifacts that exceed current technological understanding. The metallurgical analysis of samples allegedly returned by Apollo 20 reveals compositions that shouldn't exist within the known laws of chemistry. The materials exhibit atomic structures that suggest manufacturing techniques beyond current human capabilities, creating crystalline matrices that should be impossible to produce using conventional methods. The compositional analysis indicates elements arranged in configurations that challenge our understanding of atomic bonding and molecular structure. The electromagnetic properties of the lunar artifacts present their own technological paradox. The materials exhibit electromagnetic behaviors that suggest advanced engineering principles, including selective frequency absorption, electromagnetic field generation, and resonance patterns that match theoretical predictions for advanced propulsion systems. The electromagnetic properties indicate technological sophistication that exceeds current human engineering capabilities by decades or possibly centuries. The structural analysis reveals manufacturing techniques that challenge conventional understanding of materials engineering. The artifacts exhibit molecular-level precision in their construction, with atomic arrangements that suggest manufacturing processes that exceed the capabilities of current nanotechnology. The structural analysis indicates fabrication techniques that would require technological capabilities that humanity won't achieve for decades. The most disturbing aspect of the technological anomalies is their apparent self-repair capabilities. The artifacts exhibit structural properties that suggest automatic repair mechanisms with molecular configurations that can restore themselves after damage. The self-repair capabilities indicate technological sophistication that approaches the theoretical limits of material science, suggesting either extraordinary advances in human engineering or encounters with artifacts that exceed current technological understanding. The energy generation properties of the lunar artifacts present their own impossibility. The materials exhibit energy output that exceeds their apparent input, suggesting either unknown energy sources or violation of thermodynamic principles. The energy analysis indicates technological capabilities that would require fundamental advances in physics that challenge our understanding of energy conservation and generation. The information storage capabilities revealed through analysis of the artifacts suggest data storage technologies that exceed current human capabilities by orders of magnitude. The materials exhibit information density that approaches the theoretical limits of matter-based storage systems, with data encoding techniques that suggest advanced understanding of quantum information theory. The information storage capabilities indicate technological sophistication that exceeds current human engineering capabilities by decades. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the analysis techniques required to understand the artifacts. The technological sophistication of the lunar materials requires analysis methods that push the boundaries of current scientific instrumentation. The analysis itself represents a technological achievement that rivals the artifacts being studied, creating a feedback loop where the investigation advances human technology while revealing the impossibility of human origin for the artifacts. The classification protocols surrounding the technological analysis exceed those used for protecting nuclear weapons information. The analytical data is classified at levels that suggest information warfare capabilities, technological advantages, and discoveries that could fundamentally alter global power dynamics. The classification itself becomes evidence of the artifact's significance. Information this sensitive would only be protected if it revealed capabilities that could reshape human civilization. The research protocols documented in leaked reports reveal investigation techniques that exceed those used for studying conventional materials. The artifacts are subjected to analysis using experimental techniques that suggest properties beyond current scientific understanding. Materials that exhibit quantum behaviors at macro scales, structural properties that challenge known physics, and compositional characteristics that shouldn't exist within the known laws of chemistry. The most disturbing aspect of the technological anomalies is their apparent responsiveness to observation. The artifacts exhibit properties that change based on the type of analysis being performed, suggesting either advanced adaptive capabilities or quantum behaviors that extend beyond the microscopic scale. The responsiveness indicates technological sophistication that approaches the theoretical limits of material science. The industrial implications of the technological anomalies exceed those of any previous discovery. The manufacturing techniques, energy generation capabilities, and information storage properties revealed through analysis of the artifacts suggest technological capabilities that could revolutionize human civilization. The industrial applications indicate technological sophistication that could provide solutions to fundamental challenges in energy, materials, and information processing. The technological anomalies represent the ultimate paradox of modern scientific discovery. Evidence of technological capabilities that exceed current human understanding while remaining systematically hidden from the scientific community that could benefit from their study. The artifacts exist in a state of perpetual classification, simultaneously representing humanity's greatest technological discovery and its most dangerous secret. What happens to technological progress when the evidence of advanced technology is classified at levels that prevent the scientific community from studying it, creating a feedback loop where humanity's greatest discoveries remain hidden from the civilization that could benefit from their application? Section 12. The disclosure attempts. The systematic failure of every attempt to publicly disclose Apollo 20 reveals a pattern of sabotage, intimidation, and elimination that suggests a cover-up willing to sacrifice democratic principles to protect secrets that may not have justified the cost of their concealment. The congressional investigation attempts present the most disturbing aspect of the disclosure failures. Multiple members of Congress attempted to investigate Apollo 20 through official channels, yet every investigation was systematically terminated through procedural manipulation, classified briefings, and political pressure that exceeded normal executive privilege protocols. The congressional failures suggest a cover-up that operated beyond the control of elected officials. Representative Patricia Morrison's 1982 attempt to investigate Apollo 20 through the House Science Committee was terminated after a classified briefing that left her psychologically traumatized and politically neutralized. Morrison's subsequent behavior exhibited the psychological patterns associated with systematic intimidation, including paranoia, social isolation, and abandonment of previous political positions. Her transformation from aggressive investigator to passive participant suggests psychological manipulation that exceeded normal political pressure. The journalistic investigation attempts reveal a pattern of systematic failure that exceeds normal government media relations. Every journalist who attempted to investigate Apollo 20 was subjected to systematic character assassination, professional sabotage, and personal intimidation that destroyed their careers and credibility. The journalistic failures suggest a media manipulation campaign that operated beyond normal government information management protocols. Bob Woodward's alleged investigation of Apollo 20 in 1978 was terminated after sources began dying in a pattern that suggested systematic elimination. Woodward's subsequent silence regarding the investigation, despite his reputation for aggressive reporting, suggests intimidation that exceeded normal government pressure on journalists. His transformation from aggressive investigator to passive participant indicates psychological manipulation that challenged his professional integrity. The academic investigation attempts present their own pattern of systematic failure. Every academic researcher who attempted to investigate Apollo 20 was subjected to professional sabotage, funding termination, and systematic exclusion from academic institutions. The academic failures suggest a campaign that extended beyond government agencies into civilian educational institutions. Dr. Michael Chen's investigation of Apollo 20 at MIT was terminated in 1985 after his research funding was systematically eliminated and his academic position was threatened. Chen's subsequent departure from academia and transformation into a private consultant suggests professional destruction that exceeded normal academic politics. His abandonment of Apollo 20 research indicates intimidation that challenged his professional survival. The legal investigation attempts reveal the most disturbing aspect of the disclosure failures. Every legal challenge to Apollo 20's classification was systematically defeated through procedural manipulation, classified evidence, and judicial decisions that exceeded normal national security protocols. The legal failures suggest a judicial manipulation campaign that operated beyond normal constitutional constraints. The Freedom of Information Act requests regarding Apollo 20 have been systematically denied through classifications that exceed those used for nuclear weapons information. The FOIA failures suggest classification protocols that operate beyond normal executive authority, creating a legal framework that prevents civilian oversight of government activities. The most disturbing aspect of the disclosure attempts is their systematic conversion into disinformation campaigns. Every attempt to publicly disclose Apollo 20 was systematically converted into a vehicle for spreading false information that discredited the original investigation. The conversion process suggests a disinformation capability that exceeded normal government information warfare protocols. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the psychological impact on disclosure participants. The individuals who attempted to investigate Apollo 20 were subjected to systematic psychological manipulation that altered their perception of reality and their commitment to truth. The psychological manipulation created a feedback loop where the disclosure attempts became vehicles for spreading the very disinformation they were designed to counter. The disclosure attempts represent the ultimate failure of democratic oversight, a system so sophisticated that it converts oversight attempts into vehicles for spreading disinformation, so comprehensive that it neutralizes both official and unofficial investigation attempts, and so persistent that it continues to function decades after its creation. The system designed to prevent Apollo 20 disclosure has become a technological organism that feeds on investigation attempts and grows stronger through scrutiny. The failure modes of the disclosure attempts reveal their true sophistication. The system includes built-in mechanisms for detecting and countering disclosure attempts, creating a feedback loop where the cover-up becomes more elaborate in response to investigation. The system doesn't just prevent disclosure, it actively converts disclosure attempts into vehicles for spreading disinformation that supports the official narrative. What happens to democratic society when the systems designed to prevent disclosure become more sophisticated than the systems designed to ensure government transparency, creating a feedback loop where oversight attempts become vehicles for spreading the very disinformation they were designed to counter? Section 13. The modern evidence. The digital age hasn't eliminated the Apollo 20 mystery. It has transformed it into a more sophisticated form of information warfare, where truth and falsehood become indistinguishable through systematic manipulation of online sources and digital evidence. The YouTube videos released by Retired AFB in 2007 represent the most significant digital evidence of Apollo 20, yet their analysis reveals technical sophistication that exceeds the capabilities of typical hoaxers. The videos exhibit production values, technical accuracy, and psychological authenticity that suggest either genuine documentation or disinformation created using resources that exceed those available to civilian researchers. The video analysis reveals contradictory evidence that challenges conventional authentication methods. The footage exhibits technical characteristics consistent with genuine 1970s lunar photography, including correct lighting, appropriate shadows, and authentic camera movement patterns. Yet, the same footage contains anachronistic elements that suggest digital manipulation using techniques that weren't available during the alleged mission timeframe. The most disturbing aspect of the digital evidence is its apparent responsiveness to investigation. The online sources documenting Apollo 20 change their content based on the type of analysis being performed, suggesting either sophisticated adaptive disinformation or genuine evidence that exhibits quantum-like properties when subjected to scrutiny. The responsiveness indicates information warfare capabilities that exceed conventional government propaganda techniques. The digital forensics analysis reveals metadata patterns that suggest systematic manipulation of online sources. The Apollo 20 documentation exhibits digital signatures that indicate coordinated information warfare campaigns involving multiple agencies and technological capabilities that exceed those used for conventional disinformation. The metadata analysis suggests a campaign that operates beyond normal government information management protocols. The social media manipulation surrounding Apollo 20 reveals systematic attempts to control public discourse through manufactured controversy. The online debates about Apollo 20 exhibit patterns that suggest coordinated disinformation campaigns designed to discredit both believers and skeptics through systematic manipulation of public opinion. The social media manipulation represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare, a system that discredits truth and falsehood equally. The Wikipedia manipulation campaigns reveal systematic attempts to control the narrative through seemingly neutral sources. The Apollo 20 Wikipedia entries exhibit editing patterns that suggest coordinated campaigns by multiple users with sophisticated technical knowledge and access to classified information. The Wikipedia manipulation represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare, the systematic corruption of supposedly neutral information sources. The search engine manipulation reveals systematic attempts to control information access through algorithmic manipulation. The search results for Apollo 20 exhibit patterns that suggest coordinated campaigns to promote disinformation while suppressing authentic evidence. The search engine manipulation represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare. The systematic control of information access through technological manipulation. The recursive horror deepens when you examine the psychological impact of digital evidence on researchers. The individuals who investigate Apollo 20 using digital sources report systematic confusion, contradictory evidence, and psychological manipulation that exceeds normal information overload. The digital investigation process creates a feedback loop where the evidence becomes more confusing in response to scrutiny. The artificial intelligence analysis of Apollo 20 evidence reveals patterns that suggest either genuine anomalies or sophisticated disinformation that exceeds human capabilities. The AI analysis exhibits results that challenge conventional understanding of information authenticity, suggesting either genuine evidence that exhibits unusual properties or disinformation created using artificial intelligence techniques that exceed current civilian capabilities. The blockchain analysis of Apollo 20 documentation reveals systematic attempts to create false provenance for digital evidence. The blockchain signatures associated with Apollo 20 evidence exhibit patterns that suggest coordinated campaigns to create false historical records using distributed ledger technology. The blockchain manipulation represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare. The systematic corruption of supposedly immutable information storage systems. The most disturbing aspect of the modern evidence is its apparent evolution in response to investigation attempts. The digital sources documenting Apollo 20 become more sophisticated over time, suggesting either genuine evidence that exhibits adaptive properties or disinformation that evolves in response to debunking attempts. The evolution indicates information warfare capabilities that exceed conventional government propaganda techniques. The modern evidence represents the ultimate paradox of digital information. Evidence that becomes more convincing as it becomes more obviously false. Documentation that becomes more authentic as it becomes more obviously manufactured. And sources that become more credible as they become more obviously manipulated. The digital evidence exists in a quantum state between truth and falsehood, simultaneously authentic and fabricated, genuine and artificial. The digital age has transformed the Apollo 20 mystery into a more sophisticated form of information warfare, where truth and falsehood become indistinguishable through systematic manipulation of online sources and digital evidence. The modern evidence represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare, a system so sophisticated that it creates its own reality through digital manipulation, so comprehensive that it becomes indistinguishable from authentic documentation, and so persistent that it continues to evolve decades after its creation. What happens to truth in the digital age when the systems designed to preserve information become more sophisticated than the systems designed to authenticate it, creating a feedback loop where digital evidence becomes more convincing as it becomes more obviously false? Section 14. The quantum implications. The Apollo 20 mystery exists in a state of informational superposition, where the mission simultaneously happened and didn't happen, until the act of investigation collapses the probability wave into a single reality. But the collapse itself may be part of the deception. The quantum mechanical principles that govern subatomic particles seem to operate at the macro scale when applied to the Apollo 20 evidence. The mission exists in multiple states simultaneously, documented and undocumented, real and fictional, classified, and public. The evidence exhibits quantum entanglement properties, where examining one aspect of the mystery instantly affects the authenticity of evidence across the entire information system. The observer effect, fundamental to quantum mechanics, operates with disturbing precision in the Apollo 20 investigation. The act of investigating the mission changes the nature of the evidence being investigated, creating a feedback loop where the investigation becomes part of the mystery itself. The observer effect suggests that the Apollo 20 mystery exists in a state of perpetual uncertainty that collapses into different realities based on the investigator's methodology and expectations. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics finds its macro-scale equivalent in the Apollo 20 documentation. The evidence exists in a superposition of authentic and fabricated states until the act of analysis forces it into a single configuration. But the analysis itself may be part of a larger system designed to create false measurements, suggesting that the quantum collapse is artificially induced rather than naturally occurring. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that all possible realities exist simultaneously in parallel universes. Applied to Apollo 20, this implies that the mission both happened and didn't happen, with each investigation creating a new branch of reality where the evidence supports the investigator's preconceptions. The many worlds interpretation transforms the Apollo 20 mystery into an infinite regression of parallel investigations, each generating its own contradictory evidence. The quantum tunneling effect allows particles to pass through barriers that should be impossible to penetrate. The Apollo 20 evidence exhibits similar properties, appearing in classified databases, while simultaneously being absent from official records. The information tunnels through classification barriers that should make its existence impossible, suggesting either quantum information properties or classification systems that operate beyond normal security protocols. The uncertainty principle states that certain properties of particles cannot be measured simultaneously with perfect accuracy. The Apollo 20 mystery exhibits the same limitation. The more precisely you investigate the mission's existence, the less accurately you can determine its authenticity. The uncertainty principle suggests that the Apollo 20 mystery exists in a state of perpetual undecidability that prevents definitive conclusions about its reality. The quantum decoherence theory explains how quantum systems lose their quantum properties when they interact with their environment. The Apollo 20 evidence exhibits the opposite behavior. It becomes more quantum-like as it interacts with investigators, developing superposition properties that increase rather than decrease with environmental interaction. The reverse decoherence suggests that the mystery is designed to become more confusing rather than more clear through investigation. The recursive horror deepens when you realize that the quantum implications of Apollo 20 extend beyond metaphor into literal reality. The evidence exhibits information properties that match theoretical predictions for quantum information storage, suggesting either technology that exceeds current human understanding or information warfare techniques that operate at the quantum level. The quantum encryption protocols documented in classified files reveal systematic attempts to create information that exists in superposition states until decoded using specific quantum keys. The encryption protocols suggest information warfare capabilities that exceed conventional cryptography, creating messages that simultaneously contain multiple contradictory meanings until collapsed into a single interpretation through the decryption process. The quantum consciousness theories suggest that human awareness operates according to quantum mechanical principles. Applied to Apollo 20, This implies that the investigator's consciousness becomes entangled with the evidence itself, creating a feedback loop where the investigation changes the investigator's perception of reality. The quantum consciousness effect transforms the Apollo 20 mystery into a systematic attack on human cognition itself. The most disturbing aspect of the quantum implications is their apparent deliberate design. The Apollo 20 evidence exhibits quantum properties that suggest systematic engineering of information to create perpetual uncertainty. The quantum engineering represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare, a system that creates evidence that exists in superposition states until collapsed into whatever reality the investigator expects to find. The quantum measurement paradox suggests that the act of measurement creates the reality being measured rather than simply observing it. Applied to Apollo 20, this implies that the investigation doesn't discover the truth about the mission. It creates the truth through the act of investigation. The measurement paradox transforms the Apollo 20 mystery into a systematic creation of reality through investigation, rather than discovery of pre-existing facts. The quantum implications represent the ultimate paradox of information warfare. Evidence that exists in superposition states until collapsed into single realities through investigation, documentation that simultaneously contains multiple contradictory meanings until decoded using specific methodologies, and mysteries that become more mysterious through the act of investigation. The quantum properties of the Apollo 20 evidence suggest information warfare capabilities that exceed conventional understanding of reality itself. What happens to human knowledge when the systems designed to preserve information operate according to quantum mechanical principles, creating evidence that exists in superposition states until collapsed into whatever reality the investigator expects to find? Section 15. The final recursion. The Apollo 20 investigation has become a closed-loop system that feeds on its own contradictions, creating a mystery that generates more mystery through the act of investigation, until the search for truth becomes indistinguishable from the systematic creation of falsehood. And the ultimate horror of Apollo 20 isn't that it happened or didn't happen. It's that the distinction between truth and falsehood has been systematically eliminated through the creation of evidence that exists in a perpetual state of uncertainty. The mystery has achieved technological immortality by becoming immune to resolution, generating new contradictions faster than they can be investigated. The investigation process itself has become part of the conspiracy, creating a feedback loop where every attempt to solve the mystery generates new layers of deception. The investigators become unwitting participants in the very system they're attempting to expose. Their research systematically converted into vehicles for spreading the disinformation they're trying to counter. The recursive conclusion becomes inescapable. Apollo 20 exists in the space between truth and falsehood, simultaneously real and fictional, documented and fabricated. The mission has achieved the ultimate victory over rational investigation by creating evidence that becomes more convincing as it becomes more obviously false, documentation that becomes more authentic as it becomes more obviously manufactured. The Apollo 20 mystery represents the ultimate achievement of information warfare, a system so sophisticated that it creates its own reality through systematic manipulation of truth and falsehood, so comprehensive that it becomes indistinguishable from authentic history, and so persistent that it continues to evolve decades after its creation. The mystery has become a technological organism that feeds on investigation attempts and grows stronger through scrutiny. The final recursion reveals the true nature of the Apollo 20 conspiracy. It isn't a cover-up of a space mission. It's a systematic attack on the human capacity for rational investigation itself. The mystery has been designed to destroy the investigator's ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood, creating a feedback loop where the search for truth becomes the systematic creation of confusion. The Apollo 20 mystery has achieved the ultimate victory over human knowledge. It has created a question that cannot be answered because the act of investigation changes the nature of the evidence being investigated. The mystery exists in a state of perpetual uncertainty that prevents definitive conclusions while simultaneously generating infinite speculation. What happens to human civilization when the systems designed to preserve truth become more sophisticated than the systems designed to discover it, creating a feedback loop where the search for knowledge becomes the systematic destruction of the capacity for rational thought itself?